What's up, guys? Out here in the shop today, sweating like crazy. Got a fan going. It's so humid here in Jersey, but we're doing something I've been putting off for a while, hoping I can figure out the issue without resorting to this. But we're gonna tear apart the motor today. Mostly to do head gaskets. The cooling issue, I don't know. It doesn't really have like all the symptoms of a head gasket. I did notice some coolant missing the other day, but I filled it back up and it didn't go missing again. So that's a little bit peculiar, but I decided, you know what? It's not gonna cost a whole lot, just the gaskets pretty much and the labor. I might as well do it because when I built this motor, or I did the head gaskets on this motor when I got it, and I actually took the time, I thought I took enough time to really assemble things, and I tried to make sure I wouldn't have to touch this car once the season started, but I made a kind of fatal mistake, I realized. If you know about motors, but there's this thing called Quench. It's basically the distance between like the top of the piston and like the I guess like the head kind of. And now the Quench is supposed to be between 0.38 and 0.4 for like optimal motor clearance, I guess, on a small block Chevy. These head gaskets, I did the research on the part number I'd purchased without even checking thickness, are a 0.4 compressed thickness, which means my Quench is already way over unless they're both zero decked. And I don't think the block is zero decked. Regardless, we're gonna figure it out. And I'm guessing once we do the measurements, we should be able to pick up horsepower because we can bump the compression level up. Because right now the compression is probably around like 8 something to 1. We want around 9.5 to 1 with this cam I'm running. And yeah, we're gonna start over and fix my rookie mistake. So here's where I'm starting at. I already got out filter. This is off. Radiator's out. It's time to take apart the distributor and this so I can get the intake manifold off. Then we're gonna do the exhaust manifolds, pop this out, pull the valve train, and the heads will be ready to pop off. So first, let me start out by saying, if you have a fuel injected vehicle, make sure you, I think maybe my vent line's not working, but I have to take my gas cap off before I take these fuel lines off, because if I don't, this thing will just shoot fuel out until all the pressure in the tank is gone. So make sure you do that. Alright, we already ran into a little bit of an issue where power could be lost. The fuel injection tunes off the driver's side header, and all the header bolts almost were loose, but Pertronics, or Patriot headers, they're all the same company, did a great job with these gaskets, and they only blew out here and here, which is very little, but the loss of those gaskets can throw off the tune and give it a lean reading, which will make it run too rich, so that's not good. Here, the hard part. Well, really there is no hard part to taking it apart. This is the easy part. Reassembling is a little more tedious, of course, but all we have to do now is remove the valve train. I have this little board. I actually made this back when I assembled the heads. When I pull this together, and I also use it for my cam. I put my push rods in these holes to keep them in the position that they are, in the order that they are, because these parts all on the valve train do kind of wear together, and you should keep them in order. My rockers are already engraved, and for the most part, I make sure to put those in order when I lay them out, but they're engraved just in case. So we're going to take those apart, then it's going to be time to pop the heads off. Fuck. Alright, so now it's time to measure the quench, which is the clearance between the top of the piston and the top of the deck of the block. So what we're going to do this is put the piston at top dead center, which I've already done. Take a straight edge, I'm using a square. Put the square like so, and then you're going to take a set of feeler gauges. Mind you, they do make tools for this, but if you're doing this at home with a motor that's not crazily high built, this will be perfectly fine. You're going to get your feeler gauges, and you're going to test which size fits. So in my case, it was the .25. And these feeler gauges suck because they're so short. They don't really flex as much as my other ones, but my other ones don't go high. But as you can see, .25 fits super tight. It won't fit now that I like bent the feeler gauge back, but when it was bent, it fits super duper tight in there. And then we can determine everything. Alright, so I've taken some look at everything. The head gaskets appear to be good. Like I said, they appear to be alright. There's no obvious blowing out. I blew up a head gasket on a Blazer before and my two-stroke jet skis, and these edges will actually blow apart. This doesn't really have that. But I noticed on the block, this piston here is like super clean, and that one's pretty clean on the top edge too. So what this could mean is that the coolant's getting in there and steaming off and cleaning them, which is what happens. They'll come out super duper shiny when you blow a head gasket because the coolant actually cleans it as it burns because it steams off. So I'm thinking that was the problem, because when I took off the bottom row of head bolts on this driver's side head, I noticed the bolts, like, they didn't have that much resistance, and I had more leverage on this side to break them free, but they just seemed like they weren't right. So maybe I made a mistake when I was torquing them. I didn't go back over. Maybe my Harbor Freight torque wrench is a piece of shit. We'll borrow a better one this time around, but we're going to use our measurements. I ran the numbers off the top of the pistons. They're a +5 cc relief in there, and then we have a 64 cc head, and now we know the deck height is .025. So we can put all that together and calculate it, and we'll get our compression ratio. And when I just ran it through the calculator with that, I found out that it seems the compression ratio is actually right about where I want it, which is 9:5 to 1. I think came up with. I'll double check. It was right around 9:5 to 1, maybe even 9:6 to 1. But it still has a very high quench at .25 plus .40. That's .065, and you're supposed to be around .4 to .3. I've heard it's like 10-15 horsepower. But if we close that up with these pistons and these heads and this deck height, we're gonna actually run into detonation, because we're gonna bump the compression ratio too far up by bringing the quench down, and we don't want to do that. And the quench area is like the compressed height between like the surface of the head and the top of the piston. I believe it's something like that. You can look it up. It's pretty easy to learn about. So this is really my main area of concern. Look how clean the edge of that piston was. Quite frankly, I don't think that this thing was just like pissing out coolant. I think it was a very, very small leak, and it seemed to mostly happen at high RPMs or when the motor was hot, especially, not as much when it was cold. So I'm thinking that was the issue, and it was because it would just get these misfires sometimes. It almost always breaks up around right about 6,000 RPM. So we're gonna run the numbers, see what I need to order, put this thing back together, and hopefully have a motor that runs cool, so I can leave my freaking dope ass bumper on, which pisses me off that it always has to come off. Looks like way less cool. So that's why we do this shit, to be cool, you know? So I should, whenever you do motor work like this and leave your motor open, make sure you wrap it up at night. My shop is used for a bunch of different things. We do woodwork in here, everything. So dust is around. If this doesn't get back together right away, which it's not going to because I have to order parts and wait a few days, I want to make sure it's wrapped up. These parts will all get cleaned before they go back in, so I'm not too worried about them. They're all going to get a freaking good bath and brake cleaner, a good wipe down, all the surfaces clean, but make sure you keep your short block free of dirt. A buzz could land in there, a chunk of something could get thrown around. Dust and dirt, metal shavings, not good for your oil and not good for your bearings. Alright, so I did all my research, I ran all my numbers, and I ordered the parts we need to get the thing back together. So in this day that we have off of not installing the parts, we're going to clean the parts. And mostly the block and the head surfaces, these will all get cleaned when they go back in. The rockers, the push rods, the intake, and everything else is pretty much going to be cleaned. But as you can see, there's like an imprint of the old gasket. You should be able to see there's a couple spots where like the materials there. So what we're going to do is just take that down with some of these Scotch-Brite pads, some brake cleaner, and I'm also going to try these discs in my die grinder and hope it works. So I ended up ordering a steel shim gasket, which means that these surfaces do have to be pretty clean. They really should be machined. Clearly the block's not going to get machined. The heads could get redone, but I think they'll be all right. We're going to prep them. The gasket's only .015, says 15 thousandths, I believe, thick, and that's pretty thin. It's actually going to bump the compression up. So when I ran the numbers, I believe the compression was like 9.2 to 1, or maybe 9.4 to 1. With the heads compensating for GM messing up the measurements on the heads, usually they say the 64 cc's end up around 66 cc chambers. So that should put me around 10 to 1, maybe 10.2 to 1. But if it's 100% right, then we're closer to 10.5 to 1. But either way, let's get to cleaning. Alright, so we just got this head like mostly finished up. I ended up using this like rough side on the die grinder to rig this up because it wasn't made for the die grinder, but this allows me to vary the speed a little bit better, but regardless. So if we really clean this up and get rid of the marks that we just made, if you look, so I can get it to show up, you see these original machine marks this way? Those are clearly when the head was surfaced before it was installed. You can see those marks. The lighter swirls on top, if it'll focus, the lighter swirls on top going that direction, like, is from this. But the ones going that way are all the original machine marks from when this was machined. So, the good thing about this is we can look around, and for the most part, those marks are all seen throughout. And what that means is we didn't take away too much material, because if there were spots where those marks started to disappear, that'd be an issue. Now there is a slight spot here that looks like it might have got a little bit deeper than I wanted, because there's a little bit of gasket up here, but I believe that should seal fine. And next we're going to do this side of the block. I started with the Scotch-Brite and it did get a lot off, but it was taking forever, and it would have taken a lot of Scotch-Brite. So here's the new surface. The biggest thing you want to get out is all the imperfections. So as you can see, I also put rags on the coolant holes. We'll fix the bolt holes in a little bit. There was a rag in that one. They got sucked into the coolant. Damn it, we'll get them out. So really, you just want to get all the imperfections out, like the old imprint of the gasket, like right there. Use a little bit more work. But there's a couple spots where the gasket was stuck and I shaved off, as you saw with the knife. Like right there. That needs more work. And then you want to, after you get that section of gasket off with the knife, you want to really get it with the die grinder. And I'll make this known. If you're using power tools, you really shouldn't do this on aluminum heads unless you're super careful. But you can't really tell in the video. I'm not applying very much pressure and I'm keeping the RPMs down. So it's only removing the top layer that's not metal, you know. And on an iron block, it should be harder to mess up. And I'm using a plastic pad, so it's not like you're using a flap disc on this. But you want to do your best you can to keep this straight. Alright, so both heads are cleaned up. The block's all done. I was looking at the block, and if I remember right, when I did the head gasket last time, it had like a more of a paper-based gasket in there. And I scraped it off with this, if I remember right, from the block, because a lot of it stuck to it. And looking back, I'm pretty sure that's what I did. And the block has like a lot of slight scoring in the surface. So I'm gonna be honest, I'm less than I'm hopeful, but honestly, I'm gonna guess that these 15 thousandths head gaskets, the steel shims, are probably gonna leak. But we're still gonna try it, because if they work, it'll work great. If not, we're gonna have to pull it, go with a thicker head gasket made out of a composite material, and kind of take away some performance, but we'll see because I'm going to use the copper spray on them, and I'm hoping it's going to work out. Here's the nice new head gaskets. As you can see, literally just a piece of metal, but there is like a coating on here. Motorcycles and stuff, I actually use shim gaskets like this, but they're usually rubber coated. Since our surface isn't too perfect, we're going to hit this with copper spray first. This is the copper gasket. It's just like an extra layer of protection, so I'm going to shake it up real good and just dust it on here like so. Alright, so while our gasket is tacking up and now my phone is covered in a little bit of copper stuff, we're going to use this ARP Fastener Assembly lubricant. Now when you buy your head bolts, it comes with a small bag. Honestly, I'd buy this anyway because the bag is so small, it's like scary to use. I think I'm going to run out. This is like $6, but you're supposed to use this underneath the heads of the bolts and between the washer and the head. So we're just going to put a little itty bitty dab on each surface where the bolt rides, just in case, and then do the washers as well. Alright, so here on the block there's a couple holes that aren't going to be in coolant, which is literally just these top ones, I'm pretty sure. Just these top ones aren't going to be in coolant. So the rest are all going to get thread sealed, but those, what we're going to do for those is just put a little bit of this lubricant in there.
Lubricant on your finger and wipe it in the hole there. So as the bolt moves in, it will pick that stuff up. And this is better than putting on this stuff. It's a couple bucks for a tube. And originally, I mean normally, I used to say like things like this weren't necessary. In my younger days, I'm still pretty young, but honestly.
Alright, so our head gasket is nice and tacked up on the copper stuff, and I'm just not letting this completely dry. I'm just going to let it get tacky, which will also help hold this in place. But the wonderful small block Chevy was designed with dowel pins, which are probably the best thing ever. I mean, sometimes it's a pain in the ass to remove thing, but it will help hold this gasket in place while we do the head. So make sure you don't handle it too much because this copper spray will actually start to peel off almost as if Plasti Dip does. So I'm going to get a poker, ease it on down. And you want to make sure you don't drag the gasket around with this stuff on it for that reason, because this stuff will move around. Oh fuck, I kind of scratched it there. There we go. So we're just going to touch that up real quick. Just a little quick. Alright, so it's not really easy to get in position to set the head, but you're going to have to do your best to line it up so that when you drop this on, just like that, it's on. We're ready to put our bolts in. Next step is using your torque wrench. I borrowed this from a buddy. Originally I did this with a Harbor Freight one, and some of the bolts were way too easy to take off. I'm thinking that was the issue. So this time we're going to use this torque wrench I borrowed, a lot nicer unit, a lot more accurate. And I'm going to torque in 2 cycles, 40 something foot-pounds, then we're going to hit it to 70. Yeah, I'm just going to go with 70. Then there's a certain order I have to do this in, so I'm not going to be able to record it because I'm going to use my phone to see that order. But I'll show you guys when it's all done, and then we're going to do it again on the next head. Alright, so the heads are completely back on. All the bolts were torqued once, torqued again. And then I went back over and just double checked that they were all at what they're supposed to be, which I put them at 70 foot-pounds. I don't usually follow torque specs or anything like that, honestly. I mean, for most things I don't. Like putting my valve train together, even my intake most of the time I don't, although I did just buy a 1/4-inch drive torque wrench from Harbor Freight. Figured why not. But when you're doing your heads and any major engine component like the bottom end, the heads, those type of things, like the water pump, I'm not going to worry about. I'm just going to tighten it up. But those are super important to follow the sequences and the torque specs. If you don't, you could either end up blowing a head gasket, or you could pull the threads out of the head if you went like apeshit. And I think the biggest reason to follow them and use a torque wrench is because you want them to all be even. If the pressure on that head isn't even, and God forbid the block isn't perfectly even, you could end up with a leaking head gasket, so you don't want that. But back on to what we're doing, we're going to throw our valve train in, clean all this up real quick. I use these microfibers because they're lint free, keeps dirt out of the engine. When I do these, I like to take a little bit of brake cleaner and the straw and blow through the middle, because this is actually what oils the valve train. So I'm going to do all that right now. Alright, I got all the rockers back on, locked down, and set the lash on all of them. I think I did that in the previous video, so I didn't go over it. Next, we're going to do the intake manifold. See how these surfaces aren't really even dirty? I used these gaskets last time. These are 1205 gaskets from Felpro. And they're like a lot heavier material here. And it seems that it doesn't really leave as much stuff on the block. Like, they're only on for a couple of months, but still, there's no material on either the intake or the block. And that's just great. And it also comes with these little end caps. If you have a small block, you know what I'm talking about. That goes here. Personally, I don't use them. I just use RTV. You could also use the right stuff. Any gasket that's high temp will work fine. If you're planning on starting it up really fast, use the right stuff. RTV, I don't know if it's possible, but I would be scared it would suck in if it's not fully dry. And then you have to take the intake off and do it again. But I just run a bead of RTV. A lot of old time guys do it. The guys on Roadkill do it. I think it's worked great for me. So we're going to put this intake on. And then it's just the top end and headers, and we should be almost ready to go. And you only need to go a little bit up the heads, and then right across the block with a nice, even bead. Look at that, beautiful beads. Both are all lines are done. We can set this aside. If you use RTV, make sure you save the cap, because this will dry up. So take this off, put the regular cap on, and then when this dries up, you can just pop it right out. But now we're gonna set up our intake gaskets on there and then set the manifold. When you set the manifold, because we're using the RTV, you're gonna wanna be careful, just like the heads, to not move it around, because then the RTV is gonna get all over the place and it's not gonna seal right. There she is, all in her place. Next, we're gonna do headers. Then we're going to do the alternator, and then I'm going to tackle the top end. And then it's time to drop in the radiator and see if this thing runs. We can actually start it up before the radiator, but I do want to put coolant in it and see if the head gaskets leak, so we're going to get these headers. Alright, the next step in this process is going to be to time the ignition, which is done with the distributor. Now I put the motor at top dead center at the mark on the crank, and I double checked underneath that valve cover to make sure that the first cylinder was at its combustion stroke and it didn't have a valve open or closed. They're both closed right now. And we're going to slip this seal on. Super important, of course, because it's what seals the distributor, because oil does go around there. So slip this on. And with the thing at top dead center, you're going to stick this in the hole. Get it down in there right about. Now if you notice, there's a pointer here on top of the cap. And what you're going to do is actually lift the cap up, which you got to remember that this is a gear. So as you can see, it didn't drop all the way down, and it's also not pointing at cylinder 1. It's more like the third cylinder in the bank. So you're going to come out, spin it a little bit, and go a tooth forward. That's about cylinder 1. But if you notice here, if I can get the camera in there, it's not all the way seated. There's a gap there. Right there. It's a little bit hard to tell, but there's a gap. So the reason there's a gap is the distributor and the gear on the cam actually drives the oil pump on the bottom. So there's a little slot. So all you have to do is look at the bottom of the distributor, see which way that slot's gonna point when it's in, and then go with a long screwdriver with a flashlight and turn the oil pump so they should line up. Like I said, it's a little bit of finesse, because you're actually, as you drop in, it's gonna spin more, but you should be able to get after a few tries, and once you do it a few times, you'll be like a pro at it.
stick with it. I mean, that fan blowing